In the shadows of Roman history, there are stories that feel more like dark theater than reality. Tales so disturbing and yet so captivating that they almost read like nightmares carved into marble. One such story is that of Sporus, a boy whose life became a chilling reflection of absolute power, cruelty, and obsession. This is not the tale of armies clashing or emperors leading conquests across the empire. It is something far more intimate, far more unsettling. The tragic story of a young life reshaped and ultimately destroyed to satisfy the whims of one of history's most infamous rulers, Nero. Picture Rome in the year 65 AD. The empire stretched magnificently, from the wilds of Britain to the Euphrates in the east, seemingly indestructible in its glory. But within the city itself, the cracks were beginning to show. The Great Fire of Rome just a year earlier had scarred both the city and its people. Whispers of madness surrounded the emperor, and in the lavish golden palace, the Domus Aurea, Nero reigned with a mixture of brilliance, eccentricity, and terrifying instability. Nero was already known for shocking Roman society. He fancied himself an artist, an actor, a singer, and even a charioteer. He lived extravagantly, performed theatrically, and ruled erratically. But it was his private obsessions, his desires, and his unpredictable cruelty that would draw Sporus into a nightmare that seemed unimaginable, even by Rome's decadent standards. His stage appearances had already scandalized the Senate, who watched in disbelief as the Emperor of Rome performed on public platforms like a common entertainer. He forced the nobility to sit for hours while he sang, danced, and declaimed, and none dared leave, even if exhaustion overcame them. Whispers grew that Rome had no emperor but only a performer wearing the crown. His love for excess seemed boundless. He built palaces so grand they swallowed entire neighborhoods and taxed his subjects heavily to fund them. Nero's taste for spectacle bled into every aspect of his reign, and with time, the boundary between theater and reality collapsed completely. The man who once ruled the empire with decree now ruled it with performance, demanding applause as if it were tribute. What unsettled many most was not merely the extravagance, but the sense that Nero's stage extended into his private life, that everyone around him had become actors in his play. In such an atmosphere, truth mattered less than illusion, and illusion mattered more than law. Power became a performance, and performance became survival. And it was into this dangerous theater that Sporus would be pulled, cast in a role he could neither refuse nor escape. Sporus was not a senator, not a general, not even a high-born aristocrat. He was a freedman, someone technically free, but still living under the shadow of servitude within the imperial household. Yet he possessed something that in Rome could be both a gift and a curse: extraordinary beauty. Ancient accounts describe him as almost ethereal, delicate features, graceful bearing, and a presence that stood out amid the marble halls of power. It was beauty that would seal his fate, because in Rome, beauty was not always admired. Sometimes it was consumed. The spark that drew Nero's gaze to Sporus was tragedy. The emperor's second wife, Pompeia Sabina, had died under grim circumstances. Some said she died in childbirth. Others claimed Nero, in a fit of rage, had struck her fatally while she was pregnant. However it happened, Nero was left grieving. And in that grief, something darker began to take root. He became obsessed with the memory of his wife. He longed not just to remember her, but to somehow bring her back. And then he noticed Sporus. Whether by chance or design, the boy came into his sight, and what Nero saw shook him. In Sporus's face and frame, the emperor thought he glimpsed his lost wife. The resemblance, at least in his mind, was uncanny. For a man who ruled the greatest empire in the world, what was impossible for others could be ordered into reality for him. And so he did something almost unthinkable. Nero commanded that Sporus be castrated. This was no casual cruelty, but a deliberate reshaping of another human being to fit his fantasy. The imperial physicians, within the cold elegance of the palace, carried out the mutilation. Sporus's body was changed forever, his identity stripped from him. The boy's screams and protests, if there were any, were silenced by the weight of imperial authority and the marble walls that kept his suffering hidden. To Nero, this was not a human tragedy, it was preparation. The emperor was not finished. Once Sporus had been altered, Nero unveiled his full intention. He would marry the boy. Yes, Rome's ruler, the emperor himself, staged a wedding where Sporus, dressed in the richest feminine attire, dripping in jewels once worn by Pompeia Sabina, became his empress. The boy was given her very name, Sabina, and everyone in the imperial court was forced to treat him as though he were the woman Nero had lost. The spectacle was as magnificent as it was grotesque. Imagine it. Rome's elite, senators, generals, nobles, compelled to attend the wedding of their emperor to a castrated boy dressed as his dead wife. Guests brought gifts. They congratulated the couple. They smiled and applauded, even as horror simmered beneath their eyes. Publicly, they played along. Privately, they recoiled. But no one dared oppose the emperor. From that moment, Sporus lived not as himself, but as a shadow of someone else. He was Nero's empress, displayed to the Roman public and the wider world. Wherever Nero went, banquets, theaters, official functions, even tours of Greece, Sporus was there at his side, dressed in silks, crowned with jewels, expected to move, speak, and exist as though he truly were Pompeia Sabina. What toll must this have taken? Day after day, forced into the skin of someone else, robbed of identity, robbed of manhood, and robbed of freedom. His every gesture scrutinized, his every word measured against a ghost. To falter meant Nero's fury. To succeed meant further erasure of self. It was a prison without walls, a theater in which the stage never ended. The people of Rome saw the display. They saw their emperor parade through the city with this empress, a young man forced into a role he never chose. And even in a society used to excess and decadence, this spectacle disturbed them deeply. To the Romans, it was not only scandalous, but a reflection of something darker, proof that their emperor's madness had no boundaries. Within the palace, Sporus endured a cycle of strange contradictions. Nero could be violently enraged if his illusion faltered, punishing Sporus for failings that were never his. But Nero could also be lavish, showering gifts and tenderness, speaking to him as if he truly were the lost Pompeia. One moment cruelty, the next affection. It was psychological torment of the highest order, breaking down reality itself until even Sporus may have questioned who he was anymore. This bizarre relationship lasted several years, shaping every moment of the young man's life. When Nero's power began to crumble in 68 AD, Sporus was still at his side. The Senate and governors turned against the emperor. The Praetorian Guard abandoned him. Nero, increasingly desperate, fled Rome with only a handful of loyal followers, and among them was Sporus, still dressed in his empress attire, still chained to the role he never asked for. When Nero finally met his end, choosing suicide over capture, Sporus was left behind in a world that had no place for him. One might imagine freedom had at last arrived, but in truth, it marked only the beginning of another phase of humiliation. With Nero dead, Sporus became a prize, passed between powerful men like spoils of war. The new emperor Galba took possession of him, not as a rescuer, but as one might claim furniture or treasure from the fallen. Sporus was not returned to himself. He was not released. He remained trapped, forced to maintain a feminine identity that was neither honored as empress nor permitted to fade. The year of the 4 emperors followed, a rapid succession of rulers, assassinations, and shifting allegiances. Through each change of power, Sporus was handed from one to the next. Each time his fate was uncertain. Each time he was stripped of more dignity, more humanity. Under Otho, he was treated with relative kindness, perhaps because Otho himself knew how precarious power could be. But Otho's reign was short-lived, and when Vitellius took control, Sporus's nightmare reached its final, unbearable chapter. Vitellius, infamous for his cruelty and indulgence, had a plan. He intended to use Sporus not as an empress or even as a symbol of Nero's twisted love, but as entertainment for the Roman mob. He ordered that Sporus take part in the arena, not as a gladiator, but in a grotesque reenactment of the myth of Proserpina, the young maiden dragged into the underworld. In this staged humiliation, Sporus would be publicly assaulted and degraded before thousands of spectators. For a young man who had already endured years of forced feminization, identity destruction, and abuse, this was too much. To be paraded and violated as spectacle for the masses was the final cruelty. And so, faced with no escape, Sporus made the only choice left to him. He chose death. Ancient accounts say he took his own life before Vitellius's plan could be carried out. In that final act, Sporus seized back something he had been denied for years, the right to decide his own fate. His suicide was not celebrated. His death was barely remarked upon, little more than a footnote in the political chaos of the time. But in choosing death, Sporus rejected the role forced upon him and reclaimed his humanity, however briefly. The story of Sporus is haunting not just for its cruelty, but for what it reveals about the nature of absolute power. In Nero's Rome, a young man could be mutilated, renamed, and forced to live as the shadow of another, all because an emperor willed it. Sporus's life became a grotesque stage play, where identity itself was stripped away to satisfy obsession. And yet, there is also something profoundly human in his ending. After years of surviving humiliation, Sporus refused to be broken entirely. His final act of defiance stands as a tragic but undeniable assertion of selfhood, a whisper of resistance against the machinery of power that had consumed him. Today, when remembering the grandeur of Rome, the armies, the monuments, the emperors, Sporus's story forces a pause. Behind the triumphs of empire were individuals crushed under its weight, lives warped and destroyed by rulers who saw people not as humans, but as instruments of their desires. Sporus's tragedy reminds us that power without limits does not only reshape nations, it reshapes lives, it consumes identities, and in the case of one boy, it created a living doll for an emperor, until at last he chose the only escape left to him. And that is the story of Sporus, the castrated boy who became Nero's living doll. If this story moved you, remember to like, share and subscribe for more powerful journeys into history's most haunting tales. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and there are many more waiting to be told.